How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to be talking about springs. Now, I know this isn't exactly the kind of video that I normally do, but it is somewhat related to heavy machinery. In fact, the reason that I wanted to make this video is because I was just watching Farmcraft's channel, Farmcraft 101. So on that channel, he's rebuilding a very large excavator. It's like an 80,000 pound machine or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. But he was just redoing the track tensioners on it. So he took his undercarriage apart. In the track tensioner, there's a piston, there is a compression spring, and there is a pre-tension rod that runs through the middle of the spring and holds it already compressed. Before it's ever even loaded, it just sits there and the rod in the middle holds it compressed. So each of his track tensioners had the pre-tension rod broken when he took it apart. So he originally was planning on just throwing the thing back together just with the spring and not put the pre-tension rod in. Then he changed his mind, and on the most recent episode he was putting it together and he was trying to make his own pre-tension rod to put back in there. So if you haven't seen his videos, you should watch them. They're interesting. But the reason I want to make this video is because it occurred to me that most people probably have no idea what that pre-tension rod is for, including John from Farmcraft. Now, he did come up with some reasoning as to why he should replace it, because he was saying he thinks if he didn't replace the pre-tension rod, that the spring would then always be pushing on his tracks all of the time, and if the spring's always pushing on it all the time, he'll wear his tracks out faster. Which, that might be true, but I don't think that's why the pre-tension rod's there. So that's why I wanted to make this video. So anyway, we should get on with the video. So, first thing I guess I need to talk about is stress. Now, so anytime that you exert a force on an object, such as a spring or whatever, stress will build up in that object, and it will push back on you, right? So that's essentially what's happening. I'm pushing on this and it's pushing back on me, and it is creating internal stresses in the spring, internal stress in my hand also. So not to get too far into anything, but the important point for this video is that stress is proportional to force. In fact, stress is force divided by an area. For this spring, it would be divided by the cross-sectional area of the spring. And then there's a lot of other fudge factors and stuff, but that's the general idea. So that spring's just sitting there. We'll just say it's sitting there. It's got under no stress, zero stress. I squeeze it this way. And stress goes up. I pull it. Stress goes up. Essentially how it works. For springs are a little funky. If I just had something that was not a spring, or it's just like a flat thing like this, if I pull on it, that's considered positive stress. If I push on it, that's considered negative stress. So tension, compression. All right, so we talked about stress. A little bit. Up here I just drew a little undercarriage. So this would be a drive sprocket, idler wheel up here, a piston, and then the spring which will have a pre-tension rod in it, right? So the piston pushes the wheel out against this spring, right? And that's what makes this idler move out, which tensions the track. As the track goes around, every time it comes around, it puts a little bit of shock in the system because the track links are rolling over the rollers and rolling over this idler, and you get the clunk, 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 that you get in the... whenever you're driving a track machine, it's always like clunk, 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 clunk. Every clunk is putting a shock in here, and the spring is absorbing that. So it's constantly running through cycles of stress increase, stress decrease. So basically you're putting force on this spring over and over and over again. So the way that we make this spring continue to last and not break, there's three things we have to worry about. So each one of these things is a material property. We have ultimate stress, which is this SU here. We have yield stress, SY, and then down here we have SE, which is endurance stress. Okay, so this is a stress strain curve, this is an SN curve, both of these curves are created using testing, data testing. So for the stress strain curve, what you do is you just take an object like this, usually has a neck down in it, and you just pull on it. And you just keep pulling till it breaks. This is strain. I should say what... So strain is how much it moved, basically. Stress is how much force you're putting on it. It's not exactly how it is, but force goes up. As the force on the object goes up, both of these things go up. So as you're going this way, you're seeing increasing force, right? Stress goes up, strain goes up. They go up the same amount until they don't. So what you'll get is it will just linearly go up like this. At some point, it'll start to, you'll get this little whoop-de-woo there. You're pulling the object more than the stress is going up, is what this happens here. That's called yielding. That means that the stress isn't going up that much, but you're moving the object. So basically it's letting go. It's not pulling back on you as hard as it was. That's yielding. That's why they call it yielding, because it's like giving up, right? So it yields, and then it hardens a little bit, and then at some point it just breaks. So that's what happens when you pull on steel. You pull on it, eventually it yields, it starts to give up, then it tightens up a little bit, and then it snaps. So the things we care about here is SY, that's the amount of stress in it when it gives up. SU, that's the amount of stress in it when it breaks. So back in the day, like before the 1800s, these are the only two stresses anybody knew about. And when you designed anything, you just kept it below these values. You just said, okay, as long as we're less than yielding, as long as our material is not going to yield or break, obviously you don't want it to break. You don't want it to yield either. Because yielding, when steel yields, it means it permanently deforms. So if I had this is a mild steel spring. It's not really a spring, but I made it shaped like a spring. It's mild steel, so when I push on it, it's just going to give up, and it doesn't spring back, right? So that yielded. So you don't want a part to yield, because then it changes shape, and you want your parts to be the same shape they used to be. So yielding is bad, and then breaking, that's also bad, obviously. If you get to that means that the thing ruptured and it broke. So the idea was, you just never put enough force on a thing to get the stress up above these two levels. That's what everybody thought. Then came around the Industrial Revolution, things started running in cycles. Like springs, they just keep getting pushed over and over and over again. Like this, whatever. You have wheels. Wheels go around and around and around. Every time they go around, they're loaded and unloaded, loaded and unloaded. So you have loading, cyclical loading happening. This never happened before they had machines. As soon as they had machines, it happened all the time. They quickly found out that at a much lower stress level, you don't go anywhere near these things. A much lower stress level, on and off, on and off, on and off, it'll break. So then they came up with the SN curve. All this is a measured amount of stress. This is number of cycles to failure. So on this line here, this line that comes down, this upper dotted line I'll talk about in a second, just ignore that for now. But this curve, as it comes down, this is the number of cycles that it took here. This is how many cycles until it broke at this stress level. Traditionally, when somebody draws an SN curve, it means that they did positive and negative stress. So that means, so I pull on it all the way till it's up at that stress, right? And then I push on it the same amount. I pull on it with the same force that I push on it. And I go back and forth. So when you're way out here, basically this force means that you can only pull on it once and it breaks. And that's basically your ultimate is here. So your ultimate would be it would be somewhere close to here would be your ultimate. It means you just literally, you pull on it once and it's going to break immediately. But then as you start going down, you lower the stress level, like somewhere down here. You can get more and more and more cycles out of it. And then at some point it levels off, and that's what this SE is. This is your endurance stress. This is the amount of stress where you can cycle the thing an infinite number of times and it won't break. So it means infinite life. So you want to design for infinite life, usually. Unless you know how many times something's going to be cycled. Unless you know that a part will only be cycled a certain number of times until somebody throws it in the garbage anyway, then you can design that out. But usually you want to design to infinite life. So that means that you need to bring the stress level down low enough such that you can cycle it forever. So this spring up here, you want to make sure that you don't put so much force on this that the stress goes high enough that you can't cycle it forever. Alright, so that's all well and good. We need to stay below this SE and this SY and this SU. If we're below all of them, our part will last forever. Well, that's true, but there's a problem. What happens if your stress here, so that's what this line comes in. What happens if your stress is higher than SE? So why would my stress be higher than that? Well, because I need to put enough force in here to tension the track, because I need to tension the track. But if the amount of force that I need to tension the track compresses the spring such that it has a higher stress value than my endurance stress, well then, I'm not going to last forever. I'll come out here, I'll get this far to this number of cycles, and I break. So once I get out to this number of cycles, it's going to break. Well, I can't have that. So what can you do? So you know stress is force divided by area. So if I want less stress, I can have a bigger area, right? That will work. You can make the area bigger, and that'll make the stress go down with the same force. But if I do that, this spring will get so stiff that it doesn't give. And if it doesn't give, then the system's not working still. I need the spring to be able to give, and I need to tension it hard enough such that the track is tight. I cannot increase the area, and I still need to put a lot of force on it. So what do? You put on a pre-tension rod. That's what you do. That might seem like it makes no sense at all. I'm going to put more force on this spring. So I'm going to increase the amount of force that I'm putting on this spring, which is going to make all the stress go up. But there's a catch. And there is one benefit to doing this. And for that, I'm going to draw you what's called a Goodman diagram. Alright, so right here I just plotted, this is negative endurance stress, positive endurance stress. So those are the exact same value, distance from zero. Then we have your yield stress and your ultimate stress. Okay, so on this axis is our stress. So we can go up or down wherever we want. We can load this part anywhere in there. But we want to say, all right, we're going to be going up and down and up and down and up and down. But we only want to stay, we have to stay less than SE and above negative SE when we're going up and down. And if we do that, our part will never break. We can't go anywhere near SY or SU. But that's only when our average stress is zero. But Goodman found out that you don't have to have zero average. And you might be able to see where this is going. If the average stress is not zero, different things happen. So if we put a pre-tension rod in here, we're going to be able to move the mean around. All right, here's another SY and SU. They're the same as over here. But on this axis, I want to be my average, or I'll just call it mean as an average stress. So this direction is my average stress. Positive here, negative here. Here's my absolute stress. So this is just my stress, my average stress. So I've said before that pulling is positive and pushing is negative. Well, for coil springs, it's actually always positive. So if you have a compression spring like this, a compression coil spring, when I push on it, that's positive stress, and that's it. You only go from zero to positive, zero to positive. You never push and pull on the same spring. If it's a compression spring, you only ever push on it. So push, let go, push, let go. So the minimum you ever get on a coil spring is zero. This is a tension coil spring, and On a tension spring, pulling is positive. There is no pushing. You don't push on this. You only pull on it. But the point is, your stress is always positive for springs. So I can't go down to negative, so I can only go positive. Here, I have to draw 2 lines here real quick. What Goodman found out is that as you increase the average stress, you get this. All right, so this line here is my minimum stress. That's the lowest stress I'm going to ever get in my part. This line up here is my positive stress. That's the highest stress I'm ever going to get in my part. So the average is there in that middle line. That's the average between this line and this line. Here at zero mean stress, it's 0. So for a compression spring, I have to go to here, where my minimum is 0, so that's unloaded. The spring's just sitting there. My minimum's 0. And my positive is some value here. So my minimum is 0, and my positive is somewhere up here. Notice something. I'm higher than my endurance stress said that I could be. But I'm allowed to be higher because my average stress is higher. So what you can do, if you need even more stress, let's say you need to be able to get to this amount of stress here. If I need to be able to get to that amount of stress, I need to raise my average to here. How do I do that? I raise my minimum. So if I raise my minimum to here, then my average is here, and my maximum stress is up here. So if this is the level of stress I need to be able to get to, way up here, so if I need to be able to get to this level of stress, it's above my endurance stress. I need to be able to get that high in my spring. The reason I need to get that high is because that's the amount of stress I get in my spring when I exert the amount of force that I need to tension this track. The only way I'm allowed to get that much is if I raise my minimum. How do I raise my minimum? I put a pre-tension rod in there. So what you have when you have a pre-tension rod is the spring is already compressed. The spring's going to be sitting here and it's already compressed. Then when I put my force on it, it compresses it further. But then when my force lets go, the stress in the spring doesn't go back to 0. It just goes back to where the pre-tension rod had it. And then I push on it and it goes back up. And then I let go and it stays. My minimum is higher. So this is the whole point. You have to keep the minimum up. The minimum stress needs to be up, which lets your maximum stress go higher. And the maximum stress is needed because you need that amount to tension the track. Realistically, you probably need somewhere below this maximum to tension the track because you're going to get spikes when the track runs into other things. So this is why you need the pre-tension rod. Now, if you're wondering, up here, it comes to a point. This is where my mean stress is equal to ultimate stress, and my absolute stress is equal to ultimate stress, because I can't go, when my average is ultimate, I can't go higher than that in my fluctuations. I can't go higher than that. So my regular stress is also ultimate, and it comes to a point. You can't fluctuate when you're at your ultimate, and really, you should never go above the yield with this either. So you see here that you can get, as you increase the minimum stress, you can get a higher maximum stress, but you get diminishing returns. You can see here this slope is steeper than this slope, meaning that I have to keep giving more and more and more minimum, a higher minimum, for a less and less and less high maximum. So I get diminishing returns here. But you can use this trick to get your spring designed in a state such that it has infinite life and still has some give to it and still provides the amount of force you need to tension your tracks. So this is why the pre-tension rod is there, and it should go back. So over here I drew some just sine curves of loading. So what this is that's what I have here drawn. Time positive, so time positive this way, starts from 0, time goes up. This is stress on the other axis. So positive stress, negative stress. This doesn't exactly apply to springs, but this shows you what's happening with Goodman. There, I drew the rest of the Goodman diagram there. So what you have when you have a negative mean stress, so here we have 0 mean, positive mean, so I drew a dotted line there for the mean. 0 mean, positive mean, even more positive mean. Negative mean, even more negative mean. So what you get here, when you're at 0, you're right here, fluctuating this amount. When you're negative, you go farther negative. So this is mean stress. You go farther negative. The amplitude that you can get stays the same when you go negative. The amplitude doesn't change. When you go positive, the amplitude reduces. And by amplitude, I mean the difference between your mean and your min. So this distance is getting smaller the farther positive mean stress I go. The farther negative mean stress I go, it just stays exactly the same as it was at 0. And I just drew this up to show you that you get diminishing returns, and when you get to ultimate, your mean equals your actual value, and that's why it comes to a point. Okay, so we established that when you raise a minimum stress by using, say, a pre-tension rod. By the way, I keep calling it a pre-tension rod. For a compression spring, I guess it's better to call it a pre-compression rod, but it doesn't matter. The point is it preloads the spring. So from this shows that when you raise the minimum stress, you get the minimum stress up, you can also raise the maximum stress. So that's very clear by this plot, but let's think about why is that a thing? It doesn't really make intuitive sense that putting a spring under load all the time, that makes it so that you can put more force on it, right? That doesn't really seem to make any sense, but it's all about the cycling on and off and on and off. So what happens in this metal, the metal that's in this spring, when you compress it like this, there are parts of the metal that are like moving against each other. And when you have a wide range of stress, your stress changes a lot. Your strain is also changing a lot, right? Because there's a linear relationship between stress and strain. Strain means that things are moving. So you compress this spring, stuff's moving. So the more you move this, the more atoms in here move past each other. And if an atom gets out of place where it shouldn't be from you moving it over and over and over again, you get a microfracture or a micro crack starting to form, and that'll propagate through and it'll make it break. So if you don't move it as far, so right, you have the rod tensioning things, and then you only go a little bit. I'm still applying a lot of force here, right? But I'm not moving very much. Whereas if I go from completely unloaded to this much, I'm applying the same amount of maximum force when I get to this amount of compression, but I'm moving the spring a lot more. And it's all that movement, that's what causes the fatigue. So if the stress doesn't change very much, the strain doesn't change very much, and then if the strain doesn't change very much, you're less likely to get a microfracture and then less likely to have the thing propagate through and break your part. Whenever you have a very small crack in anything and then you put load on it, it puts a very high stress concentration right at the crack. You probably know this as a general rule. When you see a crack going through metal or wood or whatever you have, if you see a crack coming up, you drill a hole at the end of the crack and then it stops. The reason that hole drilling works is because when you have a crack, the stress is all concentrated at the tip of the crack. Since it's in a very small area, the stress is very high, right? Because it's force over area. you're beyond the ultimate, and then you break a little bit more, right? So that little part of metal that had the tip of the crack breaks, and then the crack moves, and then the next part breaks. So if you drill a hole, it distributes that stress along the entire surface area of the hole, make your area bigger, make your stress lower, then the crack stops. So that's how crack propagation happens. Anyway, I'm getting pretty far off topic now. I just wanted you to understand why raising the minimum stress allows you to also raise the maximum stress. Because it's all about the relative maximum to minimum. Because you don't want to move the spring very far, essentially. One other side tangent here. I found this spring. This is a coil spring. But it's square. That's very uncommon. I haven't seen that hardly ever. And I actually have a book about designing springs, and they specifically state in it, never use rectangular or square stock to make a spring. Because round is just better. It's better for springs. It's better for distributing the stress. When you have square springs, weird things happen. So yeah, but I just thought that was interesting that this is a square coil spring. Actually, rectangular cross-section coil spring. But yeah, most springs are round like this one. Anyway, hopefully this made sense to everybody. But yeah, that's why there's a pre-tension rod. So to John from Farmcraft, I think your intuition was correct that you're not going to have as much stress on your track with the pre-tension rod there, because it's going to be, right, the rod's going to be taking up the loading when you're sitting there under normal conditions or most normal conditions. But that's not the only reason the rod was there. It was there to make sure the spring doesn't break. So my advice to you if you're watching, or to anybody else who might be doing some undercarriage work, is if you come across a broken tension rod, you should put it back. You should try to get it to the same amount of tension that it was under to begin with, which you can do by measuring or whatever. You should try to do that, but if you can't get it all the way exactly the same, it probably doesn't really matter. If you notice, on John's machine, both the pre-tension rods broke. So why do I think both the pre-tension rods broke? I think they broke for the exact same reason that the spring will break if you don't do this. The stress was not the right amount in that pre-tension rod, which means it either was designed to fail first, or they just didn't do the math quite right, and they didn't get the amount of the stress fluctuation in the rod right, because the rod is getting exactly the opposite stress that the spring is getting, right? When you're pushing on it with a piston, you're unloading the rod. And when you let go with the piston, the rod that's pre-tensioning the spring gets reloaded. So if they didn't get the cycling right, if they didn't get the amount of tension in that rod right, the mean stress in that rod, you have to balance it out. So basically you have to have the right diameter of rod to make that happen. Well, the good news for John from Farmcraft is he's using a bigger rod now, so probably he can get away. So probably that bigger rod will actually work. But the other thing about having the bigger rod is at the same tension, you might overload your spring. So, I don't know. I would try to get it in the ballpark of the same amount of tension. But if you're not exact, it probably doesn't matter that much. And plus, the spring's old and already has surface defects on it. And if you don't know, surface defects are really bad for fatigue, and they'll make the things wear out faster than they would. When they make these plots, this stuff is perfectly clean material in a lab, and so is this. So something that's been sitting in a machine for 50 years is probably not going to hold up as well as something would if it was pristine, right? All right, well, I hope that made sense to everybody. I hope you found this at least somewhat entertaining. Hopefully it wasn't super boring. But yeah, I'll be getting back to regular old just bulldozer videos next week. Just wanted to throw this out there because I thought it was interesting. Hopefully you did too. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Oh yeah, and check out Farmcraft's channel if you haven't seen it. It's Farmcraft 101. And actually, I think he has Farmcraft 102. But anyway, it's a good channel, and if you like my channel, especially like the bulldozer work and stuff, you'll probably like his channel. It's very similar content. Alright, see ya.